Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And make sure I got all the right things in the right spots. Okay. We're going back to more warmer temperatures, so I figured we'd bring out some warmer backgrounds. Although where I'm at today, it was a little bit blustery. We had a couple of really good thunderstorms and then some torrential downpours for Idaho, I should say. So we're getting into spring, hopefully, finally, maybe. But on that note, tonight we're going to go into Myth and Tarot. And as you saw from the title of this stream, we're going to discuss something that has been brought up a few other times in other episodes. As I've talked about various angels, there has been a creature set that it keeps showing up, and that is the 4 living creatures. Now, little caveat here at the beginning, because this could be controversial. I'm not sure how it's going to go across to anyone who watches it or who happens to run across it. This is going to be a little bit Bible heavy because they primarily, and I've been looking, they primarily exist within the biblical structure, so the canon. And so that's where we're going to focus on as far as that goes. So, sorry, gotta move one more thing. There we go. But don't be too surprised, because we are going to be going through some biblical. I do have some apocryphal texts, mainly the Book of Enoch, that we will be referencing as well, and I'm going to be reading from various aspects of those. So, as long as you're okay with that. Oh, and one more little twist. We will still be doing the tarot reading at the end of the episode for the creatures, but because we're working with an angelic beings, we're going to use the Angel Tarot. So if any of that is problematic or confusing, you don't have to watch. But if you do decide to hang out, please comment or chat and let me know what your thoughts are. Drop a like on the video if you enjoy this type of stuff, and hit that subscribe button if you're new here. And I want to say thank you all to everyone who's subscribed. It's just a little channel, but I would like to see how big we can grow this little community here. So with that, we'll get started with the 4 living creatures. And generally in almost every reference, they're referenced as 4 creatures, although there are some allusions in other books of the Bible that say there could be many more. But in most cases, we're talking 4. And the reason, there's also a little bit of confusion, and I'll get into that towards the end. But for now, we're gonna get started, and I just want to go over, for A, who the primary characters are here, and 2, we will go into what the creatures are, or could be. In Ezekiel 1:3 specifically, it says, "The word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, there we go, in the land of Chaldea by the river Chabar, in the land of the Lord, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there." So, right off the bat, we have Ezekiel in a certain location, i.e. Chaldea, the Chaldean land, which, if you don't know, historically was the land of astrologers, priests. It was the sacred center, or descendant of Sumeria and Sumer. So this, right off the bat, sets you up for an entertaining book. And if you've never read the Bible, if you really want to get an interesting, almost sci-fi type vibe from the Bible, start with Ezekiel. It is a fascinating book, just from the descriptions in it, but it's a very entertaining, and it gives you a different view of the interactions with the divine and humans. So it's worth checking out. Anyway, sorry, back to the description of the living beings. It says, "Then I looked and beheld a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself, and a brightness was all around it, radiating out its midst, the color of amber, and the midst of the column was fire." That description alone, he's physically seeing this. It doesn't say that he was having a vision of. He was standing there witnessing this, which puts a different spin and puts a lot more weight to Ezekiel's version of the four living creatures. "And from within that fire came the likeness of four living creatures, and it was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man." So they were bipedal to a point. Each one of these creatures had 4 faces. 4's popular in this book. And each one of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, but they only had 2 of those. And the soles of their feet were the soles of calves' feet, meaning cloven hooved. Again, where did you see this? They sparkled like the color of burnished bronze. So these were people who were very tan, basically, or flaming, and I'll get into that in a second. They had the hands of a man under 2 of their wings, and on the 4 sides. So they could have had as many as 4 hands. There's some confusion on the exact definition of what that sentence means, but each of their 4 faces had 4 wings. So we're getting up there in our wing count. Their wings touched one another. The creatures did not turn when they went, but each went straight forward. So they never had to turn their head, all 4 faces of it. They would just move back and forth. There was no reason for them to turn. As for the likeness of the faces, each of the 4 creatures had the face of a man. They had a face of a lion. They had a face of an ox and face of the eagle. And they specify in Ezekiel that the face of the man was to the front, the face of the lion was on the right, the face of the ox was on the left, and the eagle was on the rear. Again, when you put all that together, that's an insane little critter. And I was trying to find some good pictures of this, and it's not an easy thing to find pictures of because the descriptions are wonky. But this is kind of what you're looking at, and there's 4 little faces in the picture there. You've got an eagle, an ox, a man, and a lion. But they're not... It's not a clear... There's not a... I mean, we didn't have photos of it, so how are you supposed to get good pictures, right? Thus were their faces. Their wings were stretched upward. 2 wings of each one touched one another, and 2 covered their bodies. So they had 2 wings up and 2 wings down, which I think that picture showed. Let me get back there. Nope, that just shows the 2 wings. Hey, it's a live stream. I'm still trying to figure all this out, but this one is kind of an interesting one just because I did not get a good picture of them with their wings down. Okay, sorry about that. Each one went straight forward. When they went wherever the spirit wanted to go, they did not turn. Why would you? You have 4 faces, a face that faces every direction. Why would you need to turn? As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire and the appearance of torches. Fire was going back and forth among the living creatures. The fire was so bright, and out of the fire went lightning. Now, make sure I get the right picture. I don't have... There it is. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So this is kind of one of the images of this thought process of these 4 burning creatures. And there is some thought that these could have been, because if you look at Middle Eastern myth and lore, they talk about the jinn. The jinn were of fire. They were before the angels. They were basically cursed by God because they refused to obey. So they were cast out. There is a theory, I only saw it once or twice on the internet, so it's not a popular theory, that these might actually be non-fallen jinn because they were so purity and their energy is straight up fire. There is nothing else that I found in any of my research to suggest that they are anything but elemental fire-based energies, which is kind of cool, but also kind of scary. The living creatures ran back and forth, appearing like flashing of lightning. There's also a theory with the 4 living creatures, and I won't go too into this rabbit hole, that this was actually one of the first extraterrestrial, so to speak, contacts. This was a contact. Ezekiel's not describing a vision. Nothing about this is a vision. This is, I was standing by this river and this came from the north. It wasn't, and I saw in a vision, or I ascended in my mind. I was standing here and this came to me. Big difference in other versions compared to other versions. As I looked at the living creatures, behold, a wheel was on earth beside each living creature and its 4 faces. The appearance of the wheels and their works was that of beryl, which is aquamarine. I can pull this one down. Boop. Which is awesome, amazing color when you think about it. Like, these things were not white, they weren't silver, they were the color of aquamarine, which is a very interesting color choice. It's a very sacred color. Aquamarine in the stone world is one of the spiritual stones. It's very high frequency, very soothing, but it's also used in a lot of spiritual practices. So that right there says that what you're dealing with is not fully terrestrial. And all 4 of these beings had the same likeness. The appearance of their works was, as it were, a wheel within a wheel. Now, this is where things get fun, because, shrink that back down, this is one interpretation of the images. So you see your wheels here, and then this guy here is supposed to be the creature. There's also another description of the creature being within the wheels, so it could be either or. And then we'll get into the description of the wheels here in a second. And when they went towards any of the 4 directions. They did not turn aside when they went. So these creatures never have to turn around, obviously. As for their rims, they were so high, they were awesome. And in that particular image, you can see just how big that would have been, because a human is like an ant. So these are just massive, massive things that he is seeing. They were so high, they were awesome, and their rims were full of eyes and around 4 wheels. So there's 4 wheels kind of spinning around here. And when the living creatures, books going everywhere. I have too many books. No, that's not true. Oh, I lost my place because I was dropping books. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them, and when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels lifted up as well. And when the spirit wanted to go, they went, because the spirit went, and the wheels were lifted together with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. So this implies, doesn't state directly, but it implies that the living creatures and the wheels are bonded. They are together. And this is one of the beautiful, horrifying images that I could find of the concept of 4 wheels spinning together with eyes all around. And I can't zoom in on this one very well. I tried, and it just gets weird when I zoom in on it too much. But this one, and then there was one other image that actually showed like these wheels were actually living, like they had almost a scaled belly inside each of these wheels. So when you really think about it, this is not a simple being that is showing up. These are powerful, powerful creatures, and their mode of transportation is even more so. So, and we'll go back to the pictures off and on through this deal. And when those went, they went. When they stood, they stood. And when those were lifted up from earth, the wheels were lifted up together, and for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When you're talking about this section, it repeats itself a lot because to me, and I've read the book of Ezekiel multiple times, it's almost like Ezekiel can't quite believe what he's seeing. Like, this is so weird. I'm telling you multiple times, you've got to believe this. This is what it was doing. And people were probably thinking he was off his rocker. And when you read the book of Ezekiel, you might think that the first round or two that you're going through. But as you keep studying it, you start to understand there's a lot more here than just a simple thing that shows up. And underneath the firmament of their wings spread out straight, one towards another. Each one had two which covered one side, and one had two which covered the other side of their body. So they were kind of wrapping themselves in their own wings. And when they went, I heard the noise of their wings, and it was the noise of many waters, and the voice of the Almighty, a tumult like the noise of an army, and when they stood still, they let down their wings. The theory, there's one of the theories that I'll reference real quick here, is that this was not just a spiritual being. Ezekiel was seeing it as such because that was the concept. He was a priest in Buzi. But there is a theory out there, and there are several people who have started to ascribe to this. And if you've watched any of the like Ancient Aliens and stuff like that on the History Channel years ago, they talk a little bit about this. There was two different scientists back in the 60s and 70s, I think. Don't quote me on the date. One of them literally just went with the description of the four living beings and this throne of heaven and just described that in his book and built a 3D model of it. Another person built the temple from the book of Ezekiel, strictly based and described it in a book of the second half. These two men were doing this work within a few years of each other, but didn't know that the other one was doing this work. What they designed, independent of each other, but coming out of this book right here, was a landing pad for a spaceship. And people think that, oh no, that's not true. What did you just hear me read? That sounds a lot more like something something physical, non-terrestrial, than simply a spiritual being. So there's a lot more here than what meets the eye. And when you really look at what was just described, you've got these things that are coming in with the thunder and lightning and fire all around and noise, and when they come to earth, they put their wings down. It sounds terrifying, except we have heard of these things. In Ezekiel's time, how would you describe a flying machine? Just like that. Something that has wings and that sets their wings down, lightning and thunder emits from underneath it. And if we go by the belief of modern theologians, they would call these living beings the cherubim, which we've talked about a little bit on here. Not quite accurate, because the four living beings, this is the only place they are. The cherubim are a massive choir. So possibly like a branch of the cherubim, but they're not cherubim themselves. And from the unbelievable number of eyes on this ridiculous set of four wheels spinning within each other, and there's four sets of those, I almost messed that up. Ophanim, which is another group of angels, they could be implied to be those guys. And it could be the case. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I'm going by the book. And it could be that, or it could be something else even more interesting, and that's the powerful part about the book of Ezekiel, is there's a lot of theories. You have a lot of theologians that are saying, this is the only thing it could be. But you weren't there. You don't know. And what he's describing literally could layer over a massive amount of things over time. On that note, going with the eyes especially, they are generally assumed to imply great intelligence. So these beings are not stupid, they're very smart. constant observation. Of course they would. Sorry, I have a kink in my elbow. And attention to detail. So this is something that is not... These beings, between the 4 living creatures and the wheels and all of that, they don't miss anything. They are always observing the throne of heaven and every single thing that might be close to the throne. Whether it is a threat or a blessing, these eyes never miss it. That also puts a little bit of a horrifying twist on what we're talking about here. These are powerful entities that are coming in to Ezekiel at this time. Now, again in Ezekiel 10:13 through 22, and I am telling you where it's at so you can check this out yourself. It's not something that I'm just like making up. The living creatures are mentioned at this point, and it says, "As for the wheels, they were called in my hearing wheels." So Ezekiel's standing there and he's like, "What is this?" And he was told they were wheels, but each one had 4 faces. The first face, and then he's going back to the beings. But here's the twist. This is the reason I don't think they're cherubim. Each of the 4 faces, the first was the face of a cherub. See, it's not the man anymore. Now that he's close to it, he's like, wait, that's not the right one. The second face was of a man, so you have a baby and a man's face on this being. The third was of a lion, and the fourth was of an eagle. So the cherub took the place of the ox. So are we still talking about cherubim? But then he says, "And the cherubim were lifted up, and this was a living creature I saw by the river." But he said this was a living creature. So we're bouncing around between different places and different people, because in the original one, it was a lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle. But this one was a face of a cherubim, the face of a man, the face of a lion, and the face of an eagle. And then there was a cherubim with it that was lifted. So what are the living creatures? I think there's more of them than just 4. The 4 are the primary ones, but when you start working through this, you start to realize, okay, there's 4 primaries around the throne of heaven, but that's not all there are. They travel with the angels frequently. And when this cherubim went up, the wheels beside him went up there, and the cherub lifted its wings to mount up from the earth, that the same wheels did not turn. So you've got the cherub taking off separate from the throne in this instance. Where was that? "And when it stood still, the wheels stood still, and when one lifted up, the other lifted up, and the spirit of the living creature was in them." So the living creature is actually something that exists within the wheel. It's not just the creature standing next to it. These, to me, would be like your drivers, so to speak. They're moving everything around under the guidance or control of a higher power. "The glory of the Lord departed from the threshold of the temple and stood over the cherubim," where it should be. "And the cherubim lifted up their wings and mounted up from the earth in my sight. And when they went out, the wheels were beside them and stood at the door of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the Lord was with them." In this instance, it implies that the living creatures are separate from the cherubim, but with the cherubim. Almost as if the living creatures are a group of beings who observe and move from the other beings from place to place. And my impression of this every time I read it is that the cherubim are with these creatures. They're the kind of the caretakers, but they're also the guides and guardians. I might be completely wrong, but I haven't found a better version of this when you read it, what it says. You also have in different spots different references to beings that are similar but not the same. And so then you start getting into that, so what am I talking about here? What am I actually looking at here? Again, we're kind of going over what some of these beings are as they show up in this instance. Now, going over biblical references first, and then we're going to get into the weeds. In Revelation 4:5 through 9, if I can find that real quick here. There we are. It talks about them again, but these are an entirely different set, similar but different, of living creatures. Where was that? 4, 5. And from the throne proceeded lightning and thundering and voices. Well, that sounds familiar. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. Okay, we're on the same page. We got some throne here. Before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal, which I love the imagery here. And in the midst of the throne and all around the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and back. Okay, so we're still on the same page with their eyeball thing. The first living creature was like a lion. So now we have individual living creatures. The second living creature was a calf. The third had the face of a man. And the fourth living creature was a flying eagle. So instead of being on one being, they're all split apart. Okay. And the 4 living creatures, each having 6 wings. Easy. Okay. And they were full of eyes across the wings, within and without. How do you have eyes within? That's a disturbing thought. Anyway, and they do not rest day or night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever. So now we have beings that are separated from each other. So are we still talking about the same living creatures? Possibly, maybe not. Don't know. So these creatures surround the throne of heaven, not support it. And what a description the Bible makes of these living creatures in Revelation. Obviously, they are not mundane or lower beings to be part of the throne of heaven, because to be in that elevated celestial point, you can't be mundane in any way, shape, or form. Lesser beings can't exist in that particular environment, so in the spiritual concept. But in Revelations, we're talking about something different. And I will get into that here in a second. I know I'm kind of dragging things out a little bit, but this is fascinating and it's a lot of fun. In the book of Enoch, ta-da! There are references to cherubim, and people think that they are the living creatures. There are some similarities one with the other, but there are very big distinctions as well, and I'm going to let you make those decisions as to what you think. Mind you, there is, to my knowledge, and I'm still looking, not a complete version any longer, at least none that the church has released, of the entirety of the Book of Enoch. Most of it is short clips, there's excerpts, there's pieces that were corrupted due to, moths and mold. So we have to work with what we've got here. That's the sad part. So in this particular version of the Book of Enoch, there's actually 3 different books, and so it's broke up into 1st Enoch, 2nd Enoch, and 3rd Enoch, and then you break it down into chapter and verse from there. So the first reference we have, if I'm on the right page, is 1st Enoch 71, 5 through 7. And he translated my spirit into the heaven of heavens. We're talking about Enoch. This is his description. And I saw it was a structure built of crystal. Well, the throne room of heaven was crystal. And between those crystals there were tongues of fire. Well, the 7 fires. That makes sense. We're on the same page. And my spirit saw the girdle which girt the house of fire. So this is like a candlestick. And on its 4 sides were streams of living fire. Intriguing. And they girt that house, the throne. And round them were seraphim, cherubim, Ophanim, and these are those who do not sleep, and they guard the throne of his glory. So now we have fire beings, the jinn, so to speak, flying around and protecting the throne. But we also have seraphim, cherubim, and Ophanim. They are not all the same being. The 4 flames stand separate. So this implies or indicates that you've got more entities there than what the canon says, which could be the reason it's not in the canon anymore. But we won't get into all of that drama because that's another mess. Make sure I'm on the right page. There we go. In third Enoch, now we're in the third book, which is technically the Hebrew book of Enoch, chapter 15, verse 1 and 2. And this is where Metatron, Enoch, is transformed into fire, and he's showing another person the glory in heaven. So as soon as the Holy One, blessed be he, God, took me into his service to attend to the throne of God, Metatron's job is up there, and the wheels, Galgalim, of the Merkaba. Now wait a minute. The four living creatures are now associated with the four wheels, but now we got Merkaba tied in? Sweet. And the needs of the Shekinah, the divine feminine, forthwith my flesh was changed into flames, my sinews into flames, my bones to coals, burning juniper, the light of my eyes, lids into splendor of lightning, my eyeballs themselves into firebrands, the hair of my head into dot flames, and my limbs and wings burnished fire. Sorry, I'm losing books again. I need better bookmarks. We'll go with that. And on my right were divisions of 6 fiery flames. On my left, firebrands were burning. Round about, storm wind and tempest were blowing to and fro. Behind me, roaring thunders and earthquakes. That sounds terrifying, but it also implies that Metatron is tied to or brought in front of these living creatures. So we still have a lot of powerful energy going on here, and it's not something simple. We're not playing with simple beings at this point. And Metatron went to the throne, discovered these wheels, the Galgalim, which is the Ophanim, if you're going by the older terms, and the apparent physical form of these living creatures. And this is where we kind of get into this idea that the living creatures are within the eyeball wheels. But they're not the cherubim, because they're separated in this book. They are distinct from the cherubim, seraphim, and Ophanim. So are they a hybrid of the three? That makes more sense, really. I mean, when we're looking at this from that perspective. There's something that's missing, and I'm not pointing fingers, although I could. But there's something missing about the modern view of the four creatures and the cherubim. It's almost like they don't want them to be separated, because we only can have angels in the modern view, angels and demons, in the modern view of spirituality and the spiritual world. But that's not quite right, because there's a lot more out there than what we want to admit to. In 3rd Enoch, chapter 33, and if you like numbers, pay attention to what I'm about to say, because in verse 3, that's a whole bunch of 3s, and verse 4, matter of fact, it's 4 sets of 3, the glorious seraphim surround the throne on 4 sides with walls of lightning, and the Ophanim surround those with firebrands round the throne of glory. And clouds of fire and clouds of flame encompass them to the right and left. The holy Sheoth, the 4 living creatures, carry the throne from below, each one with 3 fingers. The measure of each fingers is 800,700 times 100 and 6,600 parasangs. Good luck on figuring that one out, because I still am not sure what that is. And underneath the feet of the Cheoth, the 4 living creatures, 7 fiery rivers are running and flowing, and the breadth of each river is 365,000 parasangs, and its depth is 248,000 myriads of parasangs. Its length is unsearchable and immeasurable. It's interesting that they stuck the 365, saying that to be controversial. Well, yeah, I am, but it's it's different, because when we talk about this in these verses, we're talking about something that is outside of the seraphim, outside of the cherubim. In Enoch's book, these wheels, these supporters and carriers and movers of the throne, are called the Cheoth, the Galgalim. And I'm not adding, I'm literally going by what the description is. They make it into something a little bit different in the canon, but in the book of Enoch, these are all separate beings. So, you can take that with a grain of salt. You can call me crazy, I'm good with both. But in the same book, the third book of Enoch, the Hebrew version, in 39 verse 2, this will be the last one of these, and we'll get into some breaking down. Of the host and the flaming servants, the mighty Ophanim and the cherubim of the Shekinah, the holy Cheoth, 4 living creatures, and the seraphim and the Aralim, and the Tophserim and the troops of consuming fire, the fiery armies of heaven and the flaming hosts, the holy princes, adorned with crowns, clad in kingly majesty, wrapped in glory, girt with loftiness, 4 fall upon kingdom forever and ever and ever. He specifically separates the 4 creatures from the other angels. Are they still spiritual beings? Yes. But are they classified as choirs within the angelic hosts? No. In Isaiah 6:2, they talk about the seraphim that fly above the throne, and people try to make this as one of the living creatures. But did you miss the part in all of this where the living creatures are carrying the throne of heaven? Besides, the seraphim are not the same beings. They're separated out in Enoch, they're separated out in almost all angel lore. And what does this tell us? In my opinion, this explains, proves, plays out that there are a lot more spiritual beings in our universe, in the layers of reality, of spirituality, that are outside of the angels, demons, and divine. The living creatures are actually a separate group. Personally, as I've said before, they are part of the fire beings, and that sets them into a different category. Not an elemental, because they're spiritual, but we're going into that kind of that land when we talk about them. In Revelation 5 verse 6, the 4 living creatures surround the throne of heaven and protect the Lamb of God. They are also the protectors, so they have some protection aspects, which if you're carrying the throne, that kind of makes sense. You're very important people if you're toting around there. These creatures are also seen as leaders of praise in heaven. It is also believed, in this same vein of thought, that they can help us understand the heart and mind of God. If you're going with Ezekiel's version, I can see some of that. If you're going with Revelations, where they never leave heaven, probably not. Just pointing that out. Because in Ezekiel, the 4 living creatures come to earth. But in Revelation, they never leave heaven. So who's right and who's wrong here? In Revelation, they're still very powerful beings. And it is said in Revelation 6 that each of the 4 creatures calls forth one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Now we're getting into nightmare territory. These beings are not just about the movement when we talk about them in Revelation. Obviously they're not, because they're not even the same base creature at that point. And in chapter 15 of Revelations, it's the 4 living creatures that hand over the bowls of wrath to be poured out upon earth. So in Revelations, these particular creatures are not just moving stuff. They are put in an entirely different category of being, as if they are part of the cherubim or the seraphim. Again, we're talking about some serious differences here, and I will go over those right quick. In Ezekiel, the 4 living creatures have 4 wings. It's very specific, 4 wings on their body, and it sounds like 4 on their head. But in Revelation, they only have 6 total each. In Ezekiel, the writer sees the throne of heaven come physically to him. And he who sits on that throne is actually coming to communicate directly with Ezekiel. That's a entirely different image than what else is going on. Ezekiel gets a grand and very detailed tour of the 4 living creatures and the throne of heaven. That's the reason I say, if you want a good sci-fi read Ezekiel. It's just a fascinating book for what he describes. And he's not talking about it in the fact of, in most beliefs, he's not saying that he was in vision when he saw this. He said he was physically there. So take that how you see. But in Revelation, the writer describes a vision of being transported to the throne room of heaven and seeing it as if he was asleep and having these images. The writer only sees one face of each of these creatures, so he thinks that you're only getting these individual creatures. Not quite the way it's described in Ezekiel or the book of Enoch when you go through how he describes the 4 flaming corners of the throne that move it whither and throw. The classic belief is that the 4 faces, we'll just go through this real quick, have different values, spiritual values. In Ezekiel's terms, we're not going to go with the other one because they don't describe it like this. In Ezekiel, they talk about the lion being majesty, that power and that grace, that regal air. The ox, strength, pretty obvious there. The eagle is swiftness, and also being able to see everything. The human is intelligence, and the last one at times is questionable. Not to be rude, but there's times when you are like, really? Humans' intelligence? Okay. But that's the more common belief of these. And there's a more modern religious view. This popped up in 1200 AD to about 1600 AD are the 2 different options that I'm going to bring forward here. And I'm not exactly sure I agree with any of what I'm about to say about this. And the reason is, well, I'll get into that too. This more modern theory of the 4 living creatures specifically to Revelation, and this is where I'm like, what are you doing? It was the 4 gospel writers, or the 4 evangelists, depending on which version you read. It's the same people. And what's interesting is they were still alive when this was happening, so Revelation's is prophecy, but prophecy is tricky. In this interpretation of the 4 living creatures, John is the powerful lion in the book of Revelation. Luke is the priestly sacrifice of the lamb. Matthew is the human. Interesting, they made the tax collector the human. And Mark is the Holy Spirit's eagle. There's another view that Mark is the lion, Luke is the calf, Matthew is the man, John is now the eagle. In that instance, where's the ox that showed up in Ezekiel? Or where's the cherub? Because you've got 2 different energies here that are not even showing up in Revelation. There's a theory that the ox is now the calf or the lamb, so the power of the ox has been weakened to being a sacrifice, a sacrificial lamb or sacrificial calf. But why are we using the evangelists or the gospel writers as the faces of the living creatures? In that context of the time frame, it doesn't make sense. And this is, to me, a way to take away the power of the actual creatures that support and carry and move the throne of heaven. Besides, the living creatures were in existence long before the evangelists, and Ezekiel was not talking at that particular point in a prophetic tone. The living creatures carry all 4 faces, which are amazing and terrifying, on their heads. They're not individual creatures. They're all in one being. Each one had the face of an ox, a lion, man, and eagle. Or you can switch out the ox for a cherub, which would be a cherubim. They're not individual animals in the original context. Revelation is different. And there are those who think that understanding the four living creatures are the key to understanding the prophecies in Revelation. And as I was going through this part, my blood pressure went really far up, if you could only imagine. If you've watched some of my previous discussions, and I think I actually did a video about this, about prophecy and how it relates, and it drives me insane. To those people who think that understanding the four living creatures is key in Revelation to understanding all of the prophecies, I have a little bit to say to you. Unless you are a prophet and can receive and understand prophecy, you're not a seer, you're a prophet. That's completely different. You're not a mystic, you're a prophet. Again, not the same. You are guessing at what was being seen at best. What people think, and I had to write this out so I didn't start screaming at the at the camera. What people think of interpreting prophecy is at best a guess. I have discussed this, and it needs to be repeated because it's like it doesn't click with some people. Prophecy is touchy on a good day. One little twist in a symbol and the entire message changes. Not understanding the interplay of the symbols, wrong message. Not understanding time and culture of the prophecy, future, past, or the prophet, the era in which he lived, and descriptions and concepts of that time. And you guessed it, you get a wrong message. When we're looking at Revelations, we are looking at a prophecy. The descriptions, at best, are amazing, fun, and interesting. But unless you are a prophet and can see that image, that symbol, that concept through the eyes of a prophet, you really, truly do not know what is being implied, discussed, or talked about. Ezekiel, on the other hand, is talking about a physical interaction. What he is describing is something he sees, something he is getting a tour of, something he is able to be interacting with, and in some parts of the book, physically touching and going into. They are not remotely the same between the two. You can, and this is controversial because I argue about this with a lot of people, from pastors and friends to other mystics and spiritual people. Ezekiel is discussing a physical presence, something he physically saw. Revelations is talking about something that is a prophecy. They are not the same. Enoch, in the book of Enoch, which is a controversial book, again, at best, but if you go through it and you start to really look at what's being said, what Enoch is talking about fits more in line with Ezekiel. And this is where I kind of get into the concept of, in the Middle East, they talk about the jinn. They're fire beings that fell. They were basically born of corruption. But what if there were beings born of purity, still of fire? It fits in with what Enoch talks about in the 4 pillars of fire that support the throne, that move it whither and throw. We're talking about beings that are completely outside of what our normal concept of the angels would be. They're outside of what the average person in religion today is willing to understand. They want to, put them in this nice little box. They're just a form of an angel, and they might be, but they're not what you think. They're not gentle. They're not pretty. These are aggressively powerful beings, and that's something to take into consideration when you read through the Revelation aspect of this. Revelations is talking about a prophetic time period, but when you compare it to the other information that is out there, there are aspects of it that it's like, are we talking about the same things? Probably not. To be 100% honest with you, probably not. The stuff in Revelation is probably very different than the actual physical interaction that Ezekiel and Enoch had. It could be an allusion to the same thing, but the Revelator only saw one face of each of the four creatures supporting the throne. So to him, it was automatic, there's only one face, and this animal is this one, and that one is that one, and this one is this one, and that's fine if that's how he viewed it. But that's, again, where you start getting into the interplay of symbols in prophecy. And like I said, prophecy is one that will get me fired up because everyone claims, I know what the prophecy says, and I've been trained, and I went to seminary, and I went to blah, blah, blah. But you're not a prophet, you're a researcher. I'm a researcher. I love to research stuff. I know a lot of people who research, but you're not a prophet. You don't know how to see something as a symbol in a time frame. You choose to apply modern standards to something that happened 2,000 years ago. No, absolutely not. And I'm starting to rant, so we'll skip that. But when you look at the living creatures and you look at it from Enoch and Ezekiel's standpoint, we have some very unique beings. You have beings of fire. You have beings covered in eyeballs. You have beings that move the throne of heaven. These are not simple beings. These are not gentle beings. These are powerful, powerful entities in their own right. And in my opinion, they should be respected as such. Worshipped? Probably not. That's not what their point is. That's not what I'm saying. But respect them as they stand, because they are a unique form of entity. With that, wow, this went way longer than I anticipated. I apologize. Well, yeah, sort of. Let's hop over and do a quick... Where did it go? No, not that one. Sorry, I've got too many tabs open. Or tabs, buttons, whatever. And I have an itty-bitty screen. We'll hop over and do a quick tarot reading. We'll make this one short, hopefully, for the four living beings. And I use just a simple Celtic cross spread for these particular readings, just to kind of get a general idea of where the four beings are, what they're doing, fill in the blank. And I'll be looking at seeing if anyone pops into chat while I'm doing this. Again, I really and truthfully do appreciate everyone who subscribed. It means a lot to me. Like I said, I kind of started this wanting to just spread a little bit of information about some of my passions and interests, and other people who are wanting to be curious about that is kind of fun and fascinating, because I'm not the only one out there. And I like to do the readings, the public readings as well, the monthly elemental readings and the rune readings. And the runes are starting to be a little bit more chatty with me, so I'm not having to look at what the book says as much, which is nice, because I do want to get better at reading those guys. And then working with the I Ching, that's always been a fascinating one, and doing that with monthly readings is actually kind of handy, because the way the I Ching is established, it's meant for long-term big picture stuff. It's not meant for daily oracles. So anyway, different mindset altogether there. Let's take a peek at our significators. This is where the four living beings are in this moment. And when I do these readings, it is as if how I view them is as if the entity that I'm speaking of is sitting in front of me and I'm doing a personal reading for them. We'll just make it shorter. The significator, so this is who the living beings are in this moment in time. They are the Hermit and associated with Archangel Raziel, number 9 in the Major Arcana. So this is a pretty powerful statement we're getting right off the bat for these guys. Spend time in meditation, spiritual teachings, and self-discovery. The four living creatures have one purpose when they are not moving the throne around, and that is to worship and praise the holiest of holies, the divine, the Shekinah and the Holy Father. So when it says this, they're also loners. The Hermit is a solitary card. It's not a card of, we're in a big group of people and we're going to be social. The four living creatures are with each other and their handlers, whether that's the cherubim, the seraphim, or another group we haven't even talked about. They don't do a lot of interaction with anyone else. They worship and they move. That's kind of their thing. So the Hermit, being their significator, is kind of one of those like obvious choices, but I let the cards pick for who goes where. The thing that's crossing them, the obstacle, anything that's a challenge for them, is the Star. Again, a major arcana with Archangel Jophiel. Happy times, positive, optimistic, long-term plans, and on the right path. Which is fine if they didn't have a very specific goal, pattern, and purpose. These are some of the creatures in heaven that free will is not a strong energy within them. They have a purpose. So the thing that's crossing them is freedom, liberation, doing whatever you want. And that's not quite who they are. They have so much joy. They're so focused and so dedicated because that's what brings them purpose in life for what they're doing, that the concept of being free and running amok and doing their own thing doesn't really set well with them. I mean, obviously they have a set purpose. And like I said, they're not the type of being in Ezekiel or Revelation or Enoch's versions. They're not given to having that urge for doing something else. This is what they do, this is what they live for, and this is what they want. So the thing that crosses them, it's not that surprising that it's kind of a free will, follow your bliss concept, because that's not what they do. They're very dedicated. Their higher influence, their higher self, is the Page of Water. Intuitive, sensitive, artistic, and friendly. New person coming in, relationships going into new phases, heightened psychic abilities. Considering how well they are able to observe everything, this card kind of makes sense. And when we're talking about water, it's very emotional but very intuitive. Weirdly enough, water is the opposite of everything associated with the four living creatures, which is fire. But these beings are very passionate about what they're doing. And their higher self is saying that there's more people, new people coming in, there's more people becoming aware that there are other entities out there, and these are part of that class of new entities coming in. So you've got that coming in with that water, and these people are bringing in new energy. They're reviving some older beliefs. And as I mentioned before, with the two different scientists going over two different parts of Ezekiel and coming to a conclusion that weirdly enough fit together, we have a lot of that starting to pop up now, where we have the people coming in going, oh, well, that's something unique. That's something I never thought about. And that's that new energy that their higher self is bringing in for them. I love kombucha, and this is their Island Bliss flavor. Not sponsored, just really enjoy that beverage. The root or subconscious, and the way I read it with these, is they're kind of their dark side. Their shadow is the Eight of Earth. Skilled work is rewarded, learning all there is to know about a topic, going back to school. They don't need to learn anymore. Their shadow is saying, you don't know everything about your job. And they're like, yeah, we do. There's four of us. We've been doing the same thing for millennia. Basically, eternity is how it's implied. There's not a lot more to go into learning, but there's like this shadow energy that is trying to challenge them to do something different. It's not going to win because their higher self is supporting that, and who they are as people are the Hermit. So they're not, the energy of their shadow is just not fitting with them, and they know that. They understand their shadow. We all have them. And for a divine being, it's going to be their shadow doesn't really exist, especially creatures of fire. They don't have shadows. If they had a shadow, the energy would be, yo, you have more to learn, you have more to do. There's all these things you have to do. Thankfully, that doesn't really exist for them because of what they are. In their immediate past, we're talking about immortals, so we'll go back 2,000 years, is the Five of Earth. Fears surrounding money, wisdom to accept help, uncertain self-employment. Looking back over 2,000 years or so, you see this shift where people want to change them into something different. There's this uncertainty. The self-employment part is interesting because they're wanting to in the last 2,000 years, you've seen people try to change their task, to try to change their job. They're changing their certainty of who they are. So as far as the four living creatures are concerned, they're not worried about any of this. But we as meddling humans are trying to shift what they actually do. We're trying to shift who they are and how they exist in their own presence. And that's because of our fears and insecurities. We're trying to apply them to these divine beings. Now, am I doing that a little bit here too? Of course, we all do. But that's half the fun of what we do when we work with this type of energy, is we have to try to filter out our feelings, thoughts, and emotions as people who are mystics and seers, so that we're not mixing that into what we're doing with working with these entities. So their immediate future, the next 2,000 years or so, is a major arcana of number 15. In this deck, it's called the Ego, with Archangel Jophiel, a false sense of entrapment, being overly focused on material things, negative or fear-based thoughts. And this kind of applies to them interacting with us. If we get too pushy and we get too uppity and trying to get into, well, that's just not right. That's not how they should be. This is how we feel the four living beings should be. Or this is how I interpret the prophecy of the four living beings to be. That's our egos getting in the way. That's not them. They know who they are. They know what they're doing. They have a specific task. But the ego can basically make us feel that we're more important when we try to interpret what the prophecies around them are. Not always the best decision, but it does happen. Their current attitude, like where they're at, their mindset, is number 5, unity. So this is Archangel Sandalphon. One of those higher energies. Could be a seraphim that's hanging out, or it could be a cherubim that's hanging out with them. Traditional viewpoints or methods, spiritual organizations, seeking out mentors and like-minded friends. Their current environment is where they want to be. They're in the group of the healthy people. They're in unity with each other and with the seraphim, cherubim, ophanim that are working with them. They don't need outside influence. They got what they want. They have what they need. They have their purpose. Why try to change that? And they're not really looking outside. Their attitude is, this is my job, this is who I am, this is what I do. What more do you need? Not much, really. Their environment, which is where they sit. Number 21, the world with Archangel Michael, a job well done, joy, contentment, and gratitude, the path towards enlightenment. Their environment is enlightenment. Their environment is joy, peace, abundance, and prosperity. They already have their world. Their environment, their task, their job is their world. They go where the throne wants to go. They go where their handlers take them. And when I say handlers, they're the movers and shakers. They're the ones that kind of transport the beings around in heaven by the descriptions. So they're already set. They got this. They don't need outside influence. They know who they are. Their hopes or fears, if they existed, because they don't, they're fire beings, is the 9 of air, expecting the worst, self-fulfilling prophecies, and sleepless nights. So their fears would be failing at their job. But they don't have to worry about that because they're fully divine. This is just kind of like what would if. But their hope is to always do the right thing. Their hope is always to expect the best. Their hope is to succeed at their task to the best of their possible abilities. Their fear is not being there when the throne needs them. Not a very strong fear, because they're kind of there all the time. The final outcome of all of this is number 2 in the major arcana. There's a lot of major arcana, meaning that this reading is very much on the up and up. There's some big energy behind it. And number 2 is the High Priestess with Archangel Haniel. Listening to your intuition, having patience, consider carefully what you want before acting. The 4 living creatures have one purpose. They know what their purpose is, and that's to serve the throne. Their image, their ideas, and their thoughts have one practice. The High Priestess with Archangel Haniel is saying they respond to the throne, to the Shekinah glory, the Divine Feminine, and that's their purpose. The final outcome of this whole reading is they follow the intuitive guidance from the throne. They follow the intuitive guidance as they need to succeed and move forward in all that they do. So the outcome is really saying they're already in the best state. They already know who and where they are. They know what to expect, and they know where to go. They don't have doubts and fears like we do because of their position within the heavenly thrones. But if they did, we've kind of went over that a little bit with this reading. But overall, the beings known as the 4 living creatures have some very interesting history, which we've discussed a little bit in here. And I didn't delve too much into theology with it because that's a rabbit hole that you could literally spend lifetimes just trying to understand what they are. We went over that as much as you need to get started. Now, if you choose and want to really delve into understanding that, good on you. It is a huge topic. They're only referenced a little bit in the biblical canon, and I talked about the primary ones that reference them. There are a couple of other places in Genesis they're alluded to, they're not named. And in Isaiah they're alluded to, but they're not named, because they talk about the cherubim and the followers, or the cherubim and their basically partners. That's cool, because the cherubim are very heavily associated with the 4 living creatures, but they're not the same. The implication is you can't have one without the other, but they're not the same thing. So, like I said, if you're interested in that, dig deep, because it's a fascinating topic. And like I said, we've talked about them a lot with the different angels. They pop in and out as the angels are popping in and out, and we'll probably run across them again later on. And as information comes up, we'll tie it into the story. But other than that, we'll call this for the evening. I hope you enjoyed this stream. If you did, hit that like button, drop a like on the video. There we go. Drop a comment down below. Hit that subscribe if you're new here. Let me know your thoughts. If you've ever heard of the 4 living creatures, if you have a differing opinion than what I've brought forward, great. The one on the prophecies, I get a little heated because I have a different viewpoint than a lot of people on prophecy, so that's why I have a little bit stronger stance on that. But as far as the 4 living creatures, I'm all ears. This is how I have come to understand them from the years of study, through being raised in a Christian household, through studying through some of the other beliefs out there, and this is kind of how I've come to see them. So they're primarily referenced in biblical or apocryphal texts. You don't see too much about them outside of that. Although if you do know of some places where they might be outside of that, let me know, because I would love to do more research. With that, I will let you guys go. Have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you in the next video.